Alright, once again, another deck profile. This time on the updated Angel deck that I've been liking ever since the beginning, the Rezael deck, or in this case, the Rezael Vita deck, his evolved form as the Fated King, with all the Fated ones combined. But anyway, once again, another deck profile on it, because it got a huge update from set 5, because as you can tell, evolved form as a king rather than being a fated one. And I have to say, the deck still kind of plays the same exact way as it first introduced, but of course a bit stronger, while also at the same time, no longer playing with Leo Omorta in the deck, because Leo Omorta was her own little engine that you could play in the deck. But now with the Fated King, you kind of have to took her out so you could make space, and it became its full-on deck with a bunch of generic cards. And once again, speaking of the generics, this deck is so viable with so many generics in the deck, hence why the order engine exists. But I don't play the package in this deck because personally I don't like it. But in that, I have to say, Rezael has a cool design ever since it was introduced to me. Especially, it kind of reminds me of a Makuth Malek in a way, with the superior calling for the drop zone and an angel that just does healing. Although this one doesn't inflict pain to himself, so that is a bit of a difference. But I mainly like it for the Angel Knight theme, hence why I decided to build the deck in the first place. And the Evolve form was very unexpected to me, because I was not expecting Evolve form this soon, especially I was expecting at least one more season before we got Evolve form. But hey, we got Evolve form sooner than we thought, so here we are. And I have to say, you could even tell from the playmat, it has a little bit of an Ultima look to it. But anyway, onto the deck itself with, of course, the Ride deck. So we start off with the starter, Soel. You could run whatever starter you want actually. In which we go to Vita, where when you ride the grade 2 on top of it, you call it to rear guard and soul charge 1. So once again, it's another one of those grade 1s, and the soul does help, and it's another rear guard that you might want, because more rear guards the better. In which the second skill is that your Vanguard is Rezael, plus 2k. It could be attacker or booster, but it's just here as another rear guard. In which we go to the grade 2 Alancir, where when you ride a grade 3 Rezael on top, it could even be Fated King by the way, you can choose a grade 2 or less card from the drop zone and call it to rear guard. So here's the reviving part, and basically create some discard targets, but once again it's just here to set you up so you have a feel for your multi-attack. In which we go to Rezael himself, the Fated one. So first off, this main skill is that when it attacks, you can counterblast 1. Choose 2 cards with different names, with different grades as well, from the total amount from the damage zone and call them to the rear guard. So basically, if your damage zone has 2 cards, meaning that you can only call a total of grade 2 with 2 different grades. So it could be grade 1 with grade 0 because there are 2 different grades, grade 2 with grade 0, or you have 3 cards in damage zone, grade 2 and 1, something like that. And here's the part that it kind of reminds me about. So already it has multi-attack because of this skill, and it kind of reminds me of Makuth Malek in a way, except this one's during battle, but also doesn't hurt himself on top of it, so that is a nice little catch, but doesn't give extra power. But you already got inherent multi-attack with this, especially once you're at 5 damage, the more pain he gets, the stronger he gets, because at that point you can call a 3 and a 2. So that's a pretty nice part right there for multi-attack. But the second skill is the Divine skill, where Axe Soul Blast 1, shuffle all the critical triggers from your drop zone back to the deck, and this card gets Drive plus 1 the end turn. And then, for the rest of the game, you get this skill once, where if you damage check a trigger on your 6 damage, and if it's a non-heal, you heal 1 damage. So basically that part is basically giving you a miracle if you actually are about to die, but it is based on luck here, and depending on scenario, you might actually want to play this early. Hence why I'm actually running the Fated one, Rezael, as the first grade 3 ride, because sometimes you don't want to skip on this Divine skill, especially on your first grade 3 ride depending on the matchup. That's why I'm using this as the main grade 3 on the ride deck. And secondly, the superior call skill is kind of the same thing in the Fated King anyway, but only added an extra bonus if you have the extra Rezael. So I end up just playing this in the ride deck just because I don't want to skip up on the Divine skill, and in a way to me it's a little better. In which we run 3 more, not for Persona Ride of course, but for the Fated King. In which we go to the Fated King of Miracles, Rezael Vita. So, just like Destined King, you Persona Ride on top of the original, and it can be counted as the original, and it gets plus 5k power for each original copy in Soul, while also inheriting the Divine skill. but sometimes you can miss by writing this from the right deck, even if you have the other skill to add the added bonus, because sometimes you will miss. Because the second skill is the same as the original, where when this card attacks, you can counterblast 1 to choose 2 cards with different grades and equaling to the damage zone to rear guard. But after that, you can add the original Rezael to Soul, and then it gets to Superior Call another one, and all your units that are called by this ability gets plus 5k. That extra 5k buff is actually very huge, especially on the Superior Call units that can sometimes be unboosted, and that one extra Superior Call is also very huge because that is basically one additional attack, and that additional unit is not restricted based on the damage zone. That one is just an added bonus call. So yes, it is a bit stronger, but it does exactly the same thing technically if you do not have the original Rezael. Hence why I still want to write the original Rezael first, just in case you need the divine skill, and then just persona write this on top of it after, so this one is a little stronger with the extra 5k buff, at least if you do not still get the original Rezael in Soul, if you do not have the additional Rezael in hand, and you can still activate the divine skill by then. So you could have at least everything at full power once you write this on top of the original Rezael, compared to not doing it and relying on luck. But still overall, very strong. There's really not much to say because it still revolves around the rear guards. But the extra 5k power buff is actually very strong. In which we go to the main new rear guard, and probably the companion rear guard, the Blessed Dragon Gwobelius. Yes, after so long, we finally get Gwobelius' true form. Now, I was thinking running 3 of these because this is going to be the main rear guard of the deck, but this is more of a finisher than anything, so I did not run 3. But anyway, the skill is that when it's placed on rear guards, you can Soul Blast 1 to look at the top card to your deck, put it on the top or bottom. You put it at the bottom plus 5k. This kind of combos well with Rezael's skill overall because you're going to shuffle a bunch of triggers back. So having the idea of peeking on top is just very nice. Especially since, in a way, Rezael does focus on drive checking those triggers. In which the second skill is that. And then the second skill is that when this card attacks, it gets plus 5k. But if you have a Faded 1 Vanguard, it could even be Leo Morta, keep that in mind. You can counterblast 1 while your opponent's at least at grade 3. And you did not perform drive checks with the rear guard this turn. This card gets plus 10k instead and drive check. So yes, rear guard with drive checks. Of course you can't spam this, otherwise it'll be too OP. But yes, this is going to be your main rear guard finisher of the deck because it basically does what you really want, basically. Rear guard attack with an extra pressure on it. Also lets you peek on the top card of your deck, which is also very huge for the deck, especially for a deck revolving around triggers. So yeah, you do want to see this as soon as you can, but at the same time, it's more of a finisher card than anything. I was thinking of bumping this up to 3. 4 is a little too much, but I also see 2 as being enough. So that's it for the grade 3 lineup. To the grade 2 lineup, first off, Nobia. Yes, we do got the Dual Nation Brandgate one instead. That might be a little better, but I don't have extra copies of those, and those are expensive. But Nobia, so I'm placed on rear guard. If you have at least a grade 3 Rezael, you can counterblast 1, look top card of your deck to Superior Call 1 grade 3 or less card from one, then call it to rear guard. But if it's called during battle, add the card to your hand instead, so you don't get the multi-attack, and then put the rest of it to the bottom deck in any order. That can hurt sometimes, because sometimes shuffling is better, and sometimes it doesn't. But there's so many ways to shuffle, so it doesn't really matter. But it's here as a +1 engine as well, so obviously go ahead and run it, unless you have the Dual Nation card if you prefer to spend that money. But the second skill is that when this card attacks at least a grade 3 unit, and you have a grade 3 Vanguard Rezael, you can Soul Blast 1 to give this card plus 10k. That Soul Blast can be very helpful, especially with the stuff going to Soul, because sometimes you want those specific cards in drop, because as you can tell, Rezael Superior calls from the drop zone. But of course, this is pretty good as an attacker, and basically a plus engine. And then to the card that we must run is Nobius. So Nobius gets plus 10k when Superior called by Rezael's ability. That is pretty nice. And then at the end of this card attacked, you can Energy Blast 3 to put this as Soul. Helps out with Soul right there. You draw a card, and then you look at top card of your deck to put it either at the top or bottom. So once again, it lets you peek on whatever card that you want on the top or bottom, which can be very nice, especially if you have this before you do the Superior Call skill. You just attack and then peek, and then you could just leave it on the top or bottom, which could be whatever threat that your opponent can perceive, and also goes to Soul as well. So there's no reason not to run this. And also the deck doesn't really use much energy. So yeah, that's another thing. And then finally, 2 Biscot, just because you have space for it and the deck doesn't really use much energy, so it's good to use it for the draw. But it's also kind of nice during a Persona Ride turn that you can peek on the top cards of your deck as well. That's another reason why I kind of like to use this card, but mainly for the fact that I do have space for now. And now to the grade 1 lineup. So first off, 3 Aerial Sage. Based on my playtesting, 2 isn't really enough. I actually do need to have the counter charge in the deck because the deck has been using a little more counterblast than usual. But with this card, it actually just helps out with the deck so much, especially filling up the drop zone. So the Aerial Sage, you do just want to see it, but you don't want to have too many. And then I run the 2 Kurgan, just another superior call option for a grade 1, because when superior called by a divine skill unit, it gets the ability where after it attacks you can retire to countercharge 1 and plus 5k. So it's just here for extra countercharge, especially in the early game where it's also grade 1, and it's just a just in case if you need it. And then I run the 4 Saragon because Saragon is just very good. Lets you retire itself, which is already one thing, but also lets you choice draw from the top 2 cards of your deck, which is another thing, which is going to make this even better. And then finally, I run the 2 Cutlass. Now, I know many people don't run this, but personally, I kind of like it for the fact that it's a grade 0. Especially in the early game where you don't have much to call, having a grade 0 that you could call any time that is actually decent and not a trigger is actually quite helpful, and that's why I decided to run Cutlass. And because on place, it gets 1 unit plus 5k, but if it was called by ability, plus 10k instead, which is not too bad, but it also has the back row intercept skill, so that can also be pretty nice as well as a called unit to the back row and also as a booster. Hence why I decided to still run this. Even though it isn't exactly that great, I could technically take this out, but I do like the option of calling it grade 0. And then finally 4 PGs, because PGs. OT, can't skip out on that. 8 crits, have to maximize your crits because Rezael skill. 3 draws, but I am thinking about taking these out for fronts because you do get a lot of pluses in this deck, so I don't see draws as very necessary as much as fronts. And finally 4 heals, 2 being counter heals. So that's it for this deck profile on my Rezael Vita deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend? And what other changes would you make? Other than the order package, because I don't really want to play the order package in this deck. And 2, it's not entirely needed anyway, because the deck can actually function on its own without it. But overall, this deck is still fun and just pretty cool in design. Of course, it plays very similar to Makuth Malek, where you superior call the drop zone just without the pain for itself, but you get the multi-attack on top of it. So there is some cool ups and downs here. And Destined King just giving power because bringing miracles. And also, finally, Globolius' true form, the main rearguard for the deck, and in a way, probably the companion unit for the deck. But still, the deck probably didn't really change too much. It's just mostly cards from the previous set, just with the new evolved forms and Globolius himself, which the deck finally has a rearguard finisher from Globolius himself. And because of Globolius, I have to say that's actually the card that really makes this deck kind of function really well. But at the same time, it's mainly a finisher card, hence why you still see me run 2. I might still run a 3rd copy just because to see as soon as you can, but I have been seeing it quite often, so I still stick with 2. But other than that, I don't really have much to say about it. Just be aware that this is still quite an expensive deck, but it is fun to play. But other than that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.